Hello everyone and welcome to the Rift. Today we have a bunch of new cards. That's right, it's reveal season and we are getting a ton of new cards to look at and to play with. There's a lot to talk about today, so let's just jump right into it. But first, if you want to stay up to date with card reveals, then you'd better make sure to subscribe. And if you're enjoying the content, then make sure to like this video. And if you want to start playing Riftbound right now, then you can, using the resources provided in the video description. Alright, a lot of cards to talk about today. We've got a bunch of new legends, which means a bunch of new playable decks. That's super exciting, so let's go over them. The first one is Annie. This is Dark Child Annie. She's red-purple, and she says at the end of your turn, ready 2 runes. That's a really good effect. It's free, there's no condition, it's just ready 2 at the end of your turn, every turn. Yeah, that's a really good effect to have. You're going to be using this to play spells on the opponent's turn to try and slow them down so you can score 8 points quickly. Red and purple isn't exactly the best control color combo. It's more of going for a tempo game plan, just trying to score 8 points as fast as possible rather than like trying to control the game and draw the game out into a long end game like Kaisa wants to do. You don't have a big nuke option like a Cathian Rain to help really control the board. Your main control tools are going to be the red stuff that Kaisa also has access to, as well as bounce removal like Rebuke and Gust, which are temporary removal options as opposed to permanent removal, kind of delaying your opponent a turn when you play these cards instead of getting rid of things permanently. So when you utilize tools like Rebuke, you're probably not playing a longer game, because if you play a longer game, the stuff you bounce with Rebuke just comes back and you're just going to be losing out on card advantage. So you probably want to end the game quicker with this deck as opposed to like a normal control deck would want to. Just ideally take both battlefields, sit on them, and then kill all your opponent's units or bounce them back to hand when they try to contest your battlefields. Ideally, I think that's the gameplay pattern that you're probably going to go for with this deck. Red, purple, and this legend effect in combination seems pretty strong in the early to mid game, but late game your power level kind of goes down a lot. You also pay a lot of power in this deck. Potentially Rebuke costs 2, and some other red cards also cost power, so that could be an issue as well. So yeah, I think you're going for a more tempo based point win condition, just get 8 points as fast as possible, as opposed to a more card advantage like grind game late game win condition where you just try and run your opponent out of cards like a normal control deck would, because I really don't think you're going to be running your opponent out of cards with purple. That just doesn't seem like what purple is really trying to do. So yeah, I think you just try and conquer and hold a lot in the early game, get to 8 points as fast as possible, stop your opponent's units from contesting fields, and if you get to 8 points fast enough, then great, you win. But if you don't, you're just gonna get run over and start losing the game, and your opponent will eventually build up potentially too many units for you to be able to contend with. Let's talk about Annie's support cards. So this is a signature unit. The first time we've seen that, that's really interesting. This is Tibbers, of course. It's a red-purple signature unit that costs 8 energy and 2 power. It has 7 might, and when you play me, deal 3 to all units at battlefields. Not a bad effect for this cost, although it's quite expensive, and it's really only good against certain decks, and only when your opponent plays a certain way. This card's pretty easy to play around, just don't overcommit to battlefields, which people already don't do, or at least they shouldn't be doing. Yeah, it seems like it's going to be decent against some decks, and just almost useless against others. Decks that have things that have more than 3 might as their focal point, this card just doesn't really do anything against. Sure, you can combo it with your other damage spells to wipe bigger things away, but I just don't think this card is that great on its own. And getting to 8 energy in this deck is potentially something you won't be able to do consistently because of cards like Rebuke paying so much power. I think this deck would be potentially a little bit too power hungry to get to 8, and I really don't think you want to play seals in this deck because you're just playing with one less card in hand. I don't think it's something that this deck really wants to do. You could consider playing the purple seal, I guess, but I just don't think that's worth it. Yeah, I think this is mainly just a sideboard card, maybe, depending on the format. It doesn't seem that great of an effect. Against some decks, gonna be really good. Against others, it's gonna do like nothing. Moving on to the champion units, we've got Red Annie. She costs 5 energy and a power for a 4 might unit and says your spells and abilities deal 1 bonus damage. Not a bad effect to have, but I think this card is just too expensive for what it gives you. 5 cost on this is kind of yikes. I think this deck really wants to go first, so you're not playing this till turn 3, potentially turn 4 if you're paying more power. I think if this costed 4, it would be in consideration to be included, but I just don't see this as being an option. It's a bit too expensive for what it does, and this card doesn't do anything on its own until you actually get value from that effect. This is just a 4 might vanilla for 5, which is not a good rate. Yeah, I think this card is just a little bit too expensive. Again, potentially a sideboard inclusion to help with certain breakpoints in terms of hitting damage numbers that you want to hit, but I think that's about all this card is good for. Alright, Purple Annie is actually a lot better, I think. She costs 4 energy and a power for a 3 might unit. When you play me, return a spell from your trash to your hand. I think that's a lot better of an effect than the previous cards. Just straight up getting a +1 in card advantage, just getting any spell back from your discard is pretty good. Granted, this card does literally nothing until you actually play a spell, but you're probably going to be doing that pretty often, even turn 1 potentially. So yeah, I think this card adds quite a lot of value to the deck. This is your champion, so you can just play it in the chosen zone and use it when you want to. It's a good card potentially throughout every stage of the game, early game, mid game, and late game. So yeah, I think this is just a good card. Definitely synergizes well with your legend. So yeah, just really good. The next legend we have to talk about is Master Yi. He's green-orange, a pretty good color combo, and he says while a friendly unit defends alone, it gets +2 might. That's a pretty good effect. It's just free +2. Free effects in this game are pretty good. There's literally no downside to them. It does mean you only want to defend fields with 1 unit each, but that's pretty much what you want to do in this game anyway. At least in the early to mid game, that's what you want to be doing. It is kind of funny just how much might some units are able to get from this effect in the early to mid game. I think this basically just says that if you're holding a battlefield in the early to mid game, your opponent probably just can't contest it with whatever they have. So you definitely want to go first with this deck, and even if you're going second, you can just take the battlefield that your opponent doesn't take, provided they only play 1 unit down turn 1, which is going to be the case like most of the time. So yeah, I think this card is pretty good and definitely has potential. Green is already pretty decent at holding battlefields, and this just makes it even better for free. If you've got a Sona sitting on a battlefield, Sona is already really good for holding, but with this +2 effect, it basically makes it so that Sona solo holding a battlefield is essentially uncontestable in the early to mid game, and that is potentially extremely strong to have. I think Sona especially is going to be incredibly difficult and annoying to try and push off of a battlefield in this deck, and it's not like if you get knocked off of your battlefield it's that big a deal either. Green-orange has some great tools to take back battlefields. Yasuo is extremely good at attacking battlefields, so is Dead Bloom Predator. You have quite a lot of other options in orange for things that enter ready or accelerated, so I don't see this deck struggling to take battlefields either. Potentially the biggest struggle that this deck can face is its units getting killed by spells, because you don't get the +2 because you're not in combat if your opponent just lays a spell outside of combat during their turn. But this deck does have an answer for that with your signature spell, Highlander. This is a 4 energy green and orange spell with reaction. Choose a friendly unit. The next time it dies this turn, recall it exhausted instead. That's a pretty nice effect to have in this deck, although its cost is quite high, I think. This is just a basic protection spell. I don't think its cost is very great for its effect. We already have Zonya's Hourglass, which is either 2 energy or 0 if you play it hidden. It does cost power though, so there is a difference there, but I think you would rather just play Zonya's instead of this. 4 is quite a lot to pay for this kind of effect. Maybe you play this in some matchups more so than others, but I don't know. This card card doesn't seem that great to me. It does provide you an option of fixing potentially the deck's biggest weakness, but for a cost that I think is quite a lot to pay. His first champion unit, the Orange Champion, costs 7 energy and a power for a 6 might. Not a very good rate, but let's look at his abilities. He's got yanking and he enters ready. That's actually pretty good. We've seen a lot of very similar cards to this, like Warwick, which is a decent card that sees some play. Warwick costs 6 and a power for 5 might and basically does the exact same thing. If you combo this with Orange Misfortune already on your field from the previous turn, you can play this, attack a battlefield, move Misfortune, ready this, and gank over to the other field. That's potentially a very strong play. I really like this deck having access to a card like this in the Chosen Champion zone. It's a consistent way of taking battlefields. Like I said before, I don't think this deck is going to struggle for options of taking fields. Your legend doesn't exactly provide any benefits for packing, but I don't really think you need it. Green Orange is a pretty good combo at taking fields in the mid to late game, and if you're scoring a bunch of points uncontested in the early to mid game because of your legend effect and cards like Sona, and just green being good at holding things in general, I think this deck could potentially be pretty good. I don't really see it having that many weaknesses, and its strengths are pretty nice. Yeah, I'm definitely excited to try this deck out. It seems really fun and pretty good. His Orange Champion is potentially decent, but I'm not sure about him yet. He costs 5 and a power for a 4 might, which is a bad rate, and while you have 8 or more runes, he's got 8 might. Not really that much payoff for this effect. Yeah, he holds with 10, but he is just a big vanilla, and big vanillas aren't that great. I don't think you really need that much might in this deck. Green has ways of making things really big. Yasuo hits really hard. Dead Bloom's really big. Yeah, this card could be okay, but I don't know. Getting to 8 is also potentially a problem in this deck if you're paying a lot of power. Green Orange potentially pays a ton of power, so you might not even get to 8. And as soon as you get to 8, if you pay a power and go back to 7, this guy loses his ability and is just a 4 might vanilla for 5, which is terrible. Yeah, I don't see this card being that great. It's just a big vanilla, and those haven't been great. And it's not even always a big vanilla. This card is just pretty bad in the mid game. It doesn't really do anything. Next up, we have Lux, and this definitely is a control deck that wants to go into the late game, unlike something like Annie. Lux is blue-yellow, and when you play a spell that costs 5 or more, draw 1. That is potentially an extremely good effect to have. Free card draw is really nice. The big problem with this deck is that it lives or dies based on how good the spells it can play are. Blue-yellow doesn't have that many great options for spells right now that cost 5 or more, so it really just depends what we get that can support this effect. But yeah, this card definitely has potential to be very good. Yellow is already a very good control color. Blue is an alright control color. It's got good draw power, but you already have good draw power with this effect, so I don't really know if you need it. Yeah, this card definitely has potential, but it just lives or dies based on the cards you can put in this deck. Speaking of cards you can put in the deck, this is the signature spell, Final Spark. It's just 8 energy, action, deal 8. Honestly, not a bad card. The idea with this deck is to just kill everything your opponent has and then start drawing cards so that you have cards and your opponent doesn't have cards, so you just win. In the late game, when your opponent is ideally on low cards as well as you are, you just play this and kill their stuff. They can only really put 1 unit down on the board per turn, and you just kill it with a spell each turn while drawing cards, so you put your opponent in a situation where they can't really do anything meaningful. So while 8 to deal 8 isn't exactly a great rate in terms of cost for damage, you don't really care in the late game. All you really care about is just having a spell that kills something, and the fact that this can hit your opponent's base is exactly what you want. Yeah, I think this card's really good and fits what Lux is trying to do perfectly, so it's a good start to the deck. You're definitely going to need a lot more cards like this and cheaper cards than this to have actual plays in the early to mid game, which I think is where this deck is really going to struggle. But if you can get your opponent to your ideal late game scenario where you're both on a low amount of cards, then this card is great and just helps you win. So yeah, really good start for the deck, but she's definitely going to need more. Alright, this is her first champion unit, Yellow Lux, which costs 4 energy and 0 power for a 2 might unit, and abysmal rate for stats, but she's got a really good ability. She can exhaust cost herself as a reaction to add 2 energy, only to be used for spells. That's a very strong effect in this deck. It essentially just lets you start playing removal spells a turn early, which is very nice. You do kind of just skip your turn when you play this card, ideally on turn 2 going first, so that is potentially very slow, and this card doesn't really do anything in terms of contesting boards. You're probably just never putting this thing into the line of fire by just putting it onto a battlefield. You're probably just going to keep this thing in your base forever and just have it generating energy for you. I don't really see a reason to ever put it in harm's way unless it's just going to win you the game, like taking your last point. Yeah, this is definitely not a unit that wants to be on battlefields or in combat ever. It's just going to sit in your base and give you energy and let you play your spells a turn earlier, which is pretty nice. It definitely fixes an issue with the deck where you don't really do anything until mid to late game when you actually have the energy to cast big spells like your signature spell and other stuff. So yeah, getting to play them a turn earlier is potentially very good. And your legend effect cares about the printed cost of spells, so if you discount something below 5 energy, if its printed cost is 5 energy or above, you still get to draw, which is really nice. If this card gets shot while it's in your base, you're probably not very happy about that. You could potentially just lose the game outright from that if your hand is too slow, which is not good, and you don't exactly have any way of protecting this in blue-yellow, at least not that we've seen yet. Next is the other Lux, Blue Lux. She costs 6 energy and a power for a 5 might unit. When you play a spell that costs 5 or more, give me +3 might this turn. Yeah, I don't see any potential playability with this card. 5 might for 6 and a power is already bad, but this only really goes to 8. That's still not amazing. If it readied itself, it might have some potential, but its stats are bad even when you get its effect off, and that's literally all this card does. And when you don't have its boosted effects, it's just terrible. 5 might for 6 and a power is just bad. I think I'd rather just play Kaisa instead of this. I think that is just a strictly better card. It's the exact same cost, but it's just better all around. Alright, the last legend that we have today, this is Garen, and oh boy, did they do my boy dirty. This card is probably the worst legend we've seen here, and potentially the worst legend that we have. He's orange and yellow, not a bad color combo, but his effect just doesn't really work. When you conquer, if you have 4+ units at that battlefield, draw 2. Drawing 2 sounds really good. The hoops that you have to jump through to actually get this effect off are probably just not worth it and probably just never happening. To be clear, you have to have 4 or more units after combat when you conquer, so swinging in with 4 guys is potentially not even proccing this effect. You can pretty much only reliably ever get this effect off with Grand Stratagem, which is a late game card, so you don't really get your effect until like towards the end of the game, and throughout the early to mid game, you basically just don't have a legend effect, which is not good. It also requires you to get 4 units, which is a lot harder to do without Victor's legend effect giving you free units. You do have some tools to get there in yellow, but really not that many to get to 4 specifically. And if your plans get disrupted in any way, you just don't have a legend effect. So yeah, I just don't see any real potential with this guy. If it was something like when you conquer with 2 or more, draw 1, I think that would be a lot better. That's a lot easier and cheaper to accomplish. Yeah, I just don't think you're ever realistically getting this effect off. And if you do, it's in the late game where it doesn't really matter that much. His signature spell is Decisive Strike. It costs 5 energy and a power for an action spell that gives friendly units +2 this turn. Compared to Grand Stratagem, it's a bit cheaper. It's a lot cheaper in terms of power, but it only gives +2 instead of +5, so it's not that amazing. Comparing this to Siphon Power is really sad, because Siphon Power is just so much better than this card. It's got reaction, it only costs 2, and it basically gives the same amount of swing in terms of might. Yeah, I think this card would have costed 2 and have been fine. Maybe 3, but definitely not 5. That is way too much for this effect. Yeah, I just don't think you ever play this card. Garen's champion units aren't much better, honestly. This deck is in a pretty sad state, man. His first one is yellow Garen. He costs 6 energy and a power or 5 might, and other friendly units have +1 might here. Yeah, this is just strictly worse yellow Darius. That card has 6 might, has Legion to ready himself, and has basically the same effect. Yeah, that card is just better than this in every way. In terms of playability, I really don't think this card is that playable. I'd rather just put Yellow Darius in a deck if I'm gonna put any of these cards in a deck. Orange Garen is not much better. It's the same stat line, 6 energy and a power for 5 might. He's got Assault 2 and Shield 2. So he's just 7 might essentially. A slightly boosted vanilla for 6 and a power is just not good. I think this guy could have been a lot more might and still would not have been that great. But as he stands right now, yeah, this card is just bad. Poor Garen, man. The other legends and their packages are just so much better than him. He really got screwed over. But yeah, overall, I think there's a ton of potential with these cards. Honestly, some of these decks seem pretty fun and probably pretty good too. I think there's a ton of potential with Lux depending on the cards we get support her. Annie seems pretty decent. It just depends really on how fast you can get the job done before your opponent starts putting too many guys on board for you to handle. And Master Yi just all around seems pretty good. Good effect, good champion, decent spell. Not that great honestly, but does help the deck with one of its issues. Yeah, overall these decks are potentially pretty good, except for Garen. Poor Garen. Alright, that's all we have for today. I'll be posting a ton more videos on card reveals in the future, as well as live streaming gameplay and my live reactions to new cards, all throughout the course of reveal season. So if you want to keep up to date with new card reveals, then you'd better hit that subscribe button. And of course, if you want to start playing Riftbound, you can do so right now with the links in the video description. Alright, that's about all I wanted to say today. Take care.